This week we're moving more into we're going to move into front-end development for the next 3 weeks worth of class. So we're finished completely with our Rails curriculum. If you're struggling with anything on there, be sure to ask me, and be sure to just kind of like follow up. Don't let that go away. Actually, it won't go away because I need to know all of your individual project ideas by, let's say, Thursday. The individual project, you're going to be working on that from Friday of this week until Monday of the week until Cyber Monday. So I need individual project ideas just so we can kind of guide you if it's too much or if it's too little. This is going to be one of your this is going to be your individual portfolio piece. So when people are asking you about like, what did you build? You have something individually to show them. We're moving in for the next 3 weeks. We're going to be doing React.js. But I figured before Kara kind of gets started on all of the things that we need to get started with React.js, it might be nice just to kind of rewind time a little bit and see how more or less we got to this point of front-end development. So React.js kind of goes back to around 2010. Around 2010, like a lot of mobile devices started coming on the market and things became much more popular to do things on mobile. I think, what phone was I using in 2010? I think I might have had my first smartphone then. It was a BlackBerry. I do remember having a BlackBerry with a keyboard on there. It's right around that time when mobile devices started getting really, really popular. And as a result of mobile devices becoming more common because they were more affordable and things like that, we ended up with front-end frameworks like, you may have heard of AngularJS, perhaps Backbone or Ember or something like that. And basically what these front-end frameworks help developers do was they helped us create UIs, like how does a user interact with your web app without worrying about the code that created it. So the latest and greatest thing is, well, let's go back a couple years after that. So Angular and Backbone were like the original front-end frameworks. Well, not the original, like the first major front-end frameworks built for like the mobile generation. And as things got more and more advanced, we came up with things like Ember JS. There was a summer, I kid you not, where it was like days since the newest JavaScript front-end framework came out, and the maximum number was like 8 or something like that. People were just coming out with, they wanted to be the next big thing. But after a while, the whole market kind of settled down and React.js came out. So React is backed by Facebook and is currently the latest and greatest JavaScript front-end framework. And it's going to be around for quite a while because it has a major company backing it. So Oracle backs Java, Google backs Python and Go, and most financial companies still use C# and C++. So that's why these languages have survived for so long. If a big company like Facebook backs a language or a framework, it's going to be around for a while. And you may be wondering, like, we've been doing a lot of Ruby, like I really miss JavaScript, but it's kind of like, why do we have these two distinctions? Why do we have something that's so good at backend? Why do we have something that's so good at frontend? And why should we learn frontend web development? And it's basically, over the past few years, we've seen a huge shift from the responsibility of most of the code being handled by the backend, by the servers, into the front end. You can kind of see, like, way back when, if you go to like a site like Groupon.com or something like that, and I make a request, the whole page refreshes more or less. But if you think about all the really nice things of, even when you talk about like GitHub, and so this is being handled by the backend. You can kind of see it's taking a little bit longer, but when I click on week 1, it's pretty quick, right? I'm not even sure if there's a real request being made. It's very quick. And you can kind of see this little blue bar more or less moving up here. And that's the thing that's like loading it super quickly. It's not the thing that's loading it, but it's like a progress bar that you get to see. But you can kind of see when I go to like something like Walmart.com, whenever I click on any sort of link, well, this is taking way too long. Whenever I click on a link here or something like that, it's making an entire request. It's going all the way from the back end all the way back up to the front end. And because Walmart.com is so complex, like that's just kind of what they've decided is good for them for right now. But if you look at something like a GitHub, like I can click on like Thursday's worth of stuff and it goes pretty quickly. they might be using a front-end framework like React or something like that. I can't be certain.
Is there a company that has like a big amount of data like Walmart that is using something like this?
I can find out. I'm not positive off the top of my head.
I mean, it's just like text files almost, so it's like much easier to.
I can see why you say that, but yeah, GitHub is actually fairly large in the sense that like it houses most companies' code that goes on the internet. I don't know if Walmart uses GitHub. They probably do not, but I'm not exactly sure. But you can kind of see that there are nice to use websites and there are not nice to use websites. Nice to use websites might most likely have some sort of front end framework built in to help them make the user experience a little bit more appealing, so to speak. So if we talk through the MVC model, which is Model View Controller, which is what Rails is written in, the problem is as there are more and more users, there's going to be more and more load on your servers. So it's kind of like when Groupon was first created, they might have had 1,000 people, right, using it, and then it became publicly traded. They might have 20 million users a day. If there are more and more users, let's say next year they get 30 million or 40 million, they have to upgrade their infrastructure every single year, and they have to buy more rack space, and there's more stress on your servers. So what people are doing is they're saying, I'm going to unload all of that onto these people's devices. Your Google Chrome, when you're running your machine and you have a ton of tabs open, your whole machine slows down because Google Chrome uses a lot of memory, but it's on your computer. So you can load a lot of things into Google Chrome and just have Google Chrome take care of it. So what happens is now I'm making a request into, like, let's say github.com. GitHub.com will give me a response, and then my Google Chrome browser can handle most of the small requests that you're taking on. If I hit on the home button, maybe I don't need to make a whole request. Or maybe if I'm on Reddit or something like that and I want to see the next page, maybe it's already loaded. I don't need to make a brand new request every single time. So the idea is basically don't have one central point of failure. Like if you have 50 million users and one server, and you're constantly making requests to the server, there's one point of failure. What they're doing now is they're saying your phone, your computers are advanced enough to take on most of the load, so we'll hand you back all the information and have your machine take care of all of the different routing things, different routing requests and things of that nature.
Airbnb is an example, right?
I don't know. I don't know what Airbnb is using.
That loads everything. It's kind of.
Yeah. But it's just, I don't know exactly. It's just conceptually. That's what we're trying to say. It's like instead of throwing everything at the server, your machine is now taking care of a whole bunch of stuff, so that it's the only scalable option at this point. All right, so we're going to talk about basically browser history, then front-end development. And remember that all front-end code in the end is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we're talking about React and all that kind of stuff. Everything that ends up on the browser is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's never going to be any different. I'm going to share a document with you pretty soon about the differences between React and Rails. You're going to see a lot of different terminology. But I'll share that with you in a little bit. I'm going to stop exiting this. So we're going to talk about a few things. We're talking about the browser history, like how did we get to this point? Because I feel like it just might be good to have some head knowledge before we just dive into it. We're going to talk about JavaScript, NPM, analyzers, unit testing, ES6, and create React app. Some of the things that you may not have seen before are ES6 and Babel. The ES6 basically stands for ECMAScript, so the official name for JavaScript is ECMAScript, so ES. ES6 is the largest update of JavaScript in the past 9 years. It came out in about 2015. And JavaScript basically lives on your browser, and browsers get updated on their own schedule. So it's kind of like you've seen you must update your browser pretty often, and you should always be keeping up with that so you have all those security patches. But inevitably you might have someone of an older generation, perhaps with super old browser, like Internet Explorer, I don't know, 11, or I don't know if that's a new one or an old one, but they might have an old version of Internet Explorer while you might have the newest version of Google Chrome. So it's like when I write my code, how how am I supposed to account for the person who has the newest version of Google Chrome and the older version of Internet Explorer? That's what Babel is going to talk. That's what Babel does for you. It's basically going to forwards and backwards compile everything. So you never only have to write it once, and it goes forwards and backwards for you. But we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So it's important for us to have like a background in the history of front-end tech, and you can kind of see it's an. I'm hoping that you see it's like an organic evolution. Is a pretty interesting story. Before we get into like the history, let's talk about the technologies that make web-based front-end and back-end tech. And my favorite, personally, like of these books is a book called Web Design for Babies. It's a great book if you have small children, and I would recommend it for everyone. It's pretty useful. It is unfortunately sold out right now. But Web Design for Babies. There are 3 things that are part of all web designs and all websites. There's HTML, which is more or less the structure of the page. I'm not going to read this to you because we're not children here. But essentially, to summarize this is like this is the structure of the building. So behind you, you have the Chase Tower. The structure of the building is the fact that it's 60 stories tall, and it's like made by concrete and things like that. That's like the bones of the web page. Then you have CSS, and you have this stylish person, and that's the fact like what shows. So HTML is the structure of the page. CSS is how it's styled on the page. So I have large windows on all the sides of this Chase Tower. It slopes upwards. That's another CSS thing. It's a white building. That's something that's CSS. And then finally, we have JavaScript. So this JavaScript, HTML is the structure, CSS is the style, and JavaScript is the behavior, the functionality. And that's kind of like where we're going to be. JavaScript handles everything from like button clicks or keyboard events, like when I press the key down or something like that, some sort of JavaScript can be fired off. There are certain companies, unnamed companies, that when you click and start typing on a specific text box, your stuff is starting to be saved already through JavaScript on the back end, which is kind of terrifying. But there's no shortage of things that JavaScript can do. I'll just say that.
You can turn it off.
You can definitely turn off JavaScript, and that you might be safe in that way, but then you don't get any richness of using it. So let's jump back to 1993.
Yeah.
For many people, they were much younger, shall we say.
That's what you joined me here.
It's my prime right there. Yeah.
So in 1993, this is what the World Wide Web looked like. The internet was already a thing, and multiple browsers already existed. There's a person named Tim Berners-Lee, who is seen as like the grandfather of all things modern web tech. This person had written the HTTP protocol that we covered in week 5 and created his own browser called the World Wide Web. This is what the original web looked like, which is kind of crazy to see. This is where we started and where we are today. World Wide Web was built into OS X, so every single Mac had this built in, and then was renamed Nexus. Like, this is very, very OG internet.
I did that picture. That's a next box.
What's that?
It's a next box. That's what Steve Jobs did when he left Apple.
I don't know.
He built Next.
Is that right?
That was just like,
Oh yeah, in the top right corner.
yeah, that was his next project. Like,
that.
totally huge failure, but it led to OS X.
Is that right?
Anyway,
Interesting.
that's
It's
Tim.
kind of funny too because the version of JavaScript is called JS.
Is that right?
They all have names.
Oh, yeah?
One harmony makes one sense.
It's interesting.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, if you like watch that movie,
Is that right?
Next was one of his like big projects, but a huge failure. But it led to him.
Oh, is that the Ashton Kutcher movie?
No,
Or the
the
actual-
other one, the real
one. Okay,
the
the good
Fast
one.
Hunter.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then they came back to Apple because of that. And they bought it.
This is another browser that came in way back when. This is a browser called Lynx. You can kind of see like we've kind of made it quite a while. But by far the most popular browser was something called Mosaic. And this was made by NCSA, which is the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. And it was built at UIUC, which is 3 hours down the road from Chicago. It's one of top 3 programs in the country for computer science, and especially for researchers. And most of like the modern web has actually come out of UIUC. It's a great program if you ever want to, study computer science. So in 1993, like we were talking about, this was like the first major milestone for front-end tech, in that the HTML 1.0 spec was created. And basically it's a spec is more or less a way of saying, like, this is the standardized way, the correct way of writing HTML. This is what we have to have order in this. Like, it was kind of like the Wild West. We must have order. This is how HTML is going to be written across the board. It was created by Tim Berners-Lee, who's featured in this photograph, and you kind of see this gigantic, like, they make fish bowls out of these types of monitors now. You can kind of see, 25 years has gone by still, but he's a very cynical person. There's going to be a lot of different quotes that you can kind of see. He's a very cynical person. But basically, the HTML spec was created because a number of web browsers was beginning to grow, and it was important to create like official HTML standards so that all your developers could write code that's constant, and you wouldn't have like, company one has a certain way of writing HTML, company two has another way of writing HTML. So there, you needed to standardize it. 1 year later, the W3C was formed, and Tim Berners-Lee created the W3C. You can kind of you've actually used it. It's the W3 Schools, is owned by the W3C, like the World Wide Web Commission. It's a web standards committee that's responsible for maintaining and iterating on HTML standards so that one person's not in charge of it. Because Tim Berners-Lee, I'm just going to call him Tim, because Tim wrote it and he was maintaining it, but you have to kind of go with this idea of, what if Tim gets hit by a bus on the way to work? Then everything dies with that one person. There's one central point of failure, so he created this W3C organization to help maintain it from now on. Also at the NCSA one of the creators was this person named Mark Anderson, and everyone kind of laughs. This is an actual picture of Mark Anderson. It's not like altered for Coneheads, but everyone seems to laugh at that. But in 1995, Mark Anderson decided to leave the NCSA, where he had helped Tim Berners-Lee write Mosaic. And he wanted to start a new company called Mosaic Communications, where he aimed to create basically what he deemed the Mosaic killer, a revolutionary web browser at the time. So this is Mosaic, the killer of Mosaic. You can still visit this if you go to home.mcom.com. You can kind of see this is still like another browser that's available online today. This is version 2.0 of the original Mosaic, which looked like this. And the big thing about this, and it's kind of comical today when we think about it, was that this navigation, when I click on customer solutions and killer products, Internet Directory, and who we are, this was one giant image with links in the background. And that was like something that was completely revolutionary at the time. We couldn't even think about, like, how could we possibly do something like that? And it seems kind of comical today, but like, even if you think about Harry Potter, they had pictures that could move, and we just came up with that technology today, like the live whatever photographs. Like, things evolve over time, but it's kind of humorous to think back and look at this. This was one of the links on the page. Do people remember Netscape? Netscape Navigator? Basically, Mark Anderson and his small company of other developers created a commercial web browser that was paid. And they were saying to themselves, this is going to like defeat all other browsers. It's going to be the best product on the market. So in 1995, they created Netscape Navigator 1.0. And the big thing to notice about Netscape is somewhere right... let me move over for a second. Right there. It says the Netscape Navigator network and makes commerce and information as simple as point and click. They're fully compatible with HTTP and offering security. And the big thing about this is that the big thing about Netscape was that they were talking about secure communications. And at this point, they had HTTP, the protocol set up, but it wasn't secure. And at this point, you couldn't have e-commerce because you would send your credit card information over the crazy thing called the internet, and it could be hacked. But the thing about Netscape was they started worrying about security, and they started making security like web security more secure. You could officially transmit like e-commerce, credit card numbers and order information and like personal identification numbers and things of that nature. You didn't need to worry about that anymore.
Why was that so novel in the step? I mean, it was created like for military, like for government intelligence. Obviously, they were sending encrypted data before, right?
From what I understood, the internet was first created to send papers back and forth at universities. I didn't know that it was actually made for military yet. So I thought it was first created for like sending like large files and papers back and forth between like a large university. I don't actually know which one's the first one. All right. And for basically to have all of these things, like it's fast, it's reliable, it's consistent, it's secure, it's, you know, you can send your credit card information, you can have it for the low price of $49.99. And people were very happy to pay for this at that time.
They were doing online payments in 1995? Really? Okay.
Yeah, or you could have mailed it in, you could have filled out the form and put it in an envelope and sent it in.
I didn't realize it was that early.
Or you can buy it at the store.
Went to CompUSA and bought it.
Exactly. CompUSA, sometimes you buy either the floppy disks or
compact tower and a giant monitor, and you get your Netscape disk.
They send it in the mail.
And your AOL like free trial disk as well.
Yeah. So yeah, for $49.99, you can have all of these things. You can have the fast, reliable, consistent, and secure browsing ability, and people were happy to pay for this at that time. And then with that, with all the money and all the progression, they came up with Netscape Navigator 2.0. And this is where things started moving in terms of like we need front-end frameworks and JavaScript and stuff like that. So Mark Anderson says that basically they saw early on that the internet was going to grow, that was really going to connect the world. And with that, we need a browser-based language. So prior to this point, it was like all like Java and C# and stuff. That's things that lived on the server, but we needed something that lived on your machine, on every single browser. Can anyone guess what the first browser-based programming language was? What's that? Skip? Skip the question? It's actually Java. I might have misspoke just now. But yeah, the first browser-based programming language was Java, created by Sun Microsystems in partnership with Netscape. And basically, this is version 2.0 of Netscape Navigator. They were thinking about things like RSA, public security, like they were thinking about like this kind of security stuff from the very beginning. And basically what happened was Sun decided, you know, for job security and other reasons, that Java should be the only browser-based programming language. However, if you've ever dealt with Java or looked at Java code even now, it's not especially beginner friendly. It has a very high learning curve. It's not good for amateurs. And they wanted a language kind of like Visual Basic in Microsoft stack, something that was simple and casual, something that beginning programmers could also pick up, so it's not just like super advanced programmers could write it. So basically they wanted to get like kind of like a glue language. So you wanted all the functionality of Java, but not all of the difficulty of Java. This is an example of of applet code, this is how you would load Java into HTML. So you still have all this HTML stuff, everything is looking good, and then all of a sudden you get to this point where it says like applet name is Java and things like that. And this is some of the code that you would see for like getting Java into early browsers. So they said, Java's not going to work for us. We're going to need to create like a specific browser-based language, something that's a little easier for everyone to pick up. So they've tasked it to this person named Brendan Ike. And this is Brendan, a picture of Brendan here. He was part of the original Netscape team. And he created the entire JavaScript language in 10 days. So from start to finish, like writing the entire language in 10 days, which is the amount of time that more or less that we're going to be spent learning React. He wrote the entire language of JavaScript. They first called it Mocha, then they called it Mocha Script because there was like a lot of like coffee puns back in the day. and then they ended up settling on JavaScript. And you can kind of see he's like, I perpetrated JavaScript in 1995, and I've been making up for it ever since. JavaScript was very buggy at the very beginning because they only had literally one person working on it. And as a result, Netscape shipped version 2.0, which supported Java and JavaScript. Please remember that Java and JavaScript are not the same thing. And then the HTML 2.0 spec came out in the same year. It was like, it's very quick. Between 93 and 95, people were just kind of like rushing to get all this stuff done. So you may have noticed that I really haven't mentioned Microsoft yet, despite it being like the largest operating system back then and probably close to the largest operating system now, even though I think OS X is taking a good share of the market. 1995 was a really big year for Microsoft. They released Windows 95, which included a beautiful 1.0 version of their Internet Explorer browser. And this is kind of like a picture of the original Internet Explorer browser. So Internet Explorer came out in 1995, and then later that year they released version 2.0. Again, this was like the Wild West. They really needed to get stuff out quickly because other companies were getting things out.
Could you use Netscape on a Windows computer, or that was not? It was not.
You could, yeah. But you had to pay for it.
Yeah. You had the choice. You had to pay.
Yeah, exactly. $50.
Just using Internet Explorer, which is free.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So basically, like Internet Explorer came in free on all enhanced versions of Windows 95. So if you bought a machine with Windows 95, you automatically got Internet Explorer for free. And basically, by not charging royalties for it, like Microsoft was able to avoid like paying royalty fees to Mosaic because it was essentially the same thing. Like they took a lot of the developers were the same, so they more or less stole the code over from Mosaic into Microsoft. But because it's free, you can't sue us because we're not making any money off of it. So even though Netscape was was functionally better than Internet Explorer and more popular, like it's free or it's $50. What are you going to choose? You're going to choose the free one, even if you like don't have to, even if you don't get all the bells and whistles. And this ultimately began like the browser wars of the 90s, which was the battle between Internet Explorer and Netscape. Yeah, I mean, this battle kind of continues on today between Google, Chrome, and Firefox. Like Internet Explorer is so terrible at this point, but like you can kind of see like there's always going to be browser battles. There's always going to be like competition for the market, which is a good thing. 96, CSS was created, and they created the 1.0 version spec. At this point, like people up to the point where we had CSS, people had to actually put the code into HTML itself, which means it wasn't reusable. So they had a lot of inline styling, but they weren't able to like say like all H1s are going to be red. I have to like physically go in and say like this H1 is red, this H1 is red, this H1 is red. And in the same year, Internet Explorer 3.0 came out. And at this point, Netscape decided to also jump in and release their 3.0. So they had, Netscape had 90% of the market, but Internet Explorer was slowly catching up. It's free. They had a lot of the same features. They had CSS support. They had ActiveX, which allowed for things such as like C++ being put in the web page and not just Java. Internet Explorer also beat out Netscape in the sense that they were iterating very, very quickly. And basically they said, if you want to create new tags in HTML and not worry about the next year's version of the spec to come out, we will allow that as well. So there's like they were just kind of keeping up with like the market, and Netscape was not. And that's why you kind of see things on the internet like this, which is like best viewed with Internet Explorer, Netscape. Like actually you should use Netscape. And I don't know if people remember seeing this on the internet, but that's kind of like what was going on, where it's like, hey, we are the better. We're the better browser here, or we're the better browser here. And basically what happened was these logos generally recognized the divergence between the standards supported by the browsers and signified which browser was best used for testing pages. Netscape was kind of skeptical towards style sheets, and then their implementation of style sheets, CSS, turned out to be like a kind of like a half-assed attempt to stop Microsoft from stealing market share. And we can kind of see that today as well with like certain companies that are like half buying into something, and then a company buys in 100%, and then they completely crush the other company. But yeah, ultimately, Netscape did not keep up with the market, the market demand, like of I want CSS style sheets, I want more than just Java to be put inside the browser, and then ultimately it died. But while it's dead and no one can really use Netscape now, they gave birth to things like HTTPS. They gave birth to JavaScript. They gave birth to SSL, Java plugins, and all that kind of stuff. Like, so Netscape does have its place in history, but it is ultimately dead now.
Okay, so they shifted from Netscape to Oracle, right? Like the founders.
I do not know the answer to that question.
Right.
He's thinking of Java.
Yeah.
Java in general.
Java is backed
Controlled
by
by
Oracle.
No, but I thought Mark Andreessen and the other guy.
Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee.
No.
Brandon Knight.
Ben Horowitz.
I don't know.
All right.
And yeah, we're gonna basically see what happens with the future of web technologies. But essentially, what it is like JavaScript was created as a result of like a lot of people moving towards like modern browsers, which were able to handle quite a lot of code. So yeah, we'll see what happens with the battle between Google and Firefox and other browsers. But yeah, I think we'll take a break here, and when we get back, Kara will start going over ES6 and all of that kind of stuff.